emotional expression. This is the first of 3 skills that I'm going to discuss under a new competency, which is the self-expression competency. The previous 3 videos have been under the self-perception competency. And so self-perception just moves and transitions directly into self-expression. Everything we're internalizing and being aware of on a personal level obviously begins to transition into how we express those internalizations and how we're actually sending out that communication in different ways. So today is about emotional expression, but as I've done before, I want to give a brief breakdown on the self-expression competency. And so self-expression is really, again, an extension of self-perception. It's the action of internal perception, or a better way of putting it is putting self-perception into communicative action. So it involves 3 skills, one of which we'll talk about today, emotional expression, as well as the other 2 being assertiveness and independence. And so success in this space basically equates to actively telling the truth, and not just your truth, but a kind of a 360 truth that everyone that is understanding the message can resonate with. And then also it has to do with having authentic and synchronistic expression in verbal and non-verbal communication. And I'll kind of break that down a little later as well. But before I dive too deeply into emotional expression, I want to give, again, another quick quote. This quote comes from an American writer, and her name is Pearl Buck. And basically it goes such as this: self-expression must pass into communication for its fulfillment. So kind of goes on to say that after internalizing and reflecting through self-perception, like we've been talking about, we must communicate it outwardly for fulfillment. Human beings are social beings, and as much as anyone else, especially myself, enjoy having alone time and being independent, at the end of the day, we were wired and designed to be social with one another. It creates some sort of fulfillment in part of our well-being. And that's where emotional expression comes into play. And so to define emotional expression, basically in our interactions with others, whether we are aware or not, we're constantly giving out emotional messages via the words we use, the meaning of those words, the tone and the volume of our speech, and then also the expression of our face and body language. And so also an often overlooked piece of that is our internal intention, right? How we're truly feeling and intending this message to be delivered from the inside. A lot of people, might not be able to pick up on these things, but it's always there. It's kind of like that vibe that you feel whenever you're meeting someone, or they're delivering some sort of message to you, if you're getting some sort of positive or negative feeling from it. So in addition to that, once you're sending this message, once you're delivering a message, there's also the added layer of people receiving these messages and unconsciously or consciously we're having their own responses to them. So it's a multi-layered process with a lot of different key parts to it in terms of non-verbal and verbal communication, all the different pieces to that, and then all the different dimensions between one person and another. It obviously gets quite dense and complicated, but to be effective at this obviously can go a long way. And so a few kind of modern day examples I want to touch on real briefly if I can. One, if you guys will remember, back in the early 1980s, Johnson & Johnson had a big problem with Tylenol. Essentially, during the processing of however many bottles of Tylenol, someone was putting poison into these bottles, causing a lot of deaths and overall, obviously marketing problems for the company. But in an interview given by a spokesperson from Tylenol, this person was extremely effective in their emotional expression. They expressed a lot of sadness for the people that were affected. They really took the time to condemn the issue at hand, as well as speak emotionally about who was affected, and so far as to have, you know, their own tears coming out of their eyes during the interview. All of this is really just to say that even though their market share dropped from, I believe, 35% to 10% after that problem occurred, this constant sort of effective emotional expression actually allowed them to rebound back the very next year higher than they've ever been, and ultimately become the most popular pain medication in the United States. So to contrast that with another kind of modern example, the BP oil spill that happened back in 2010, who at that time the CEO was Tony Hayward. He actually was responsible for the incident, obviously acting as the CEO of BP, which was the explosion of the Deepwater Horizon oil rig in the Gulf, and it resulted in a few deaths, I think 10 or so, and then also was affecting obviously the ecological life with 100,000 plus barrels of oil leaking into the Gulf per day. So his appearances to the public were really being taken as unconcerning, right? And some quotes were attributed to him during that incident resolution period. Just to name a few, he said some things like, quote unquote, "We made a few little mistakes early on," and you know, playing it off as something that wasn't a big deal. And during live television recording, he actually told a cameraman to get out of here, get off of the scene. And also, he said something along the lines of, you know, "We're sorry for the massive disruption it's caused to their lives," but then adding, "There's no one who wants this thing over more than I do. I'd like my life back." And so he took time during this incident to also attend a yacht race, in which one of the boats that was participating in the race was a boat that he co-owned. And so in the end, this guy obviously lost his job, and whether he was oblivious or just genuinely unconcerned about the events, he clearly was not well versed in effective emotional expression. And you can see how the public kind of viewed that incident and the company behind it versus, you know, back in the early 1980s with the Tylenol incident. Another quick example is the presidential campaign between Nixon and John F. Kennedy. It was the first televised debate ever had, and it really played a huge part in the decisioning behind the campaign, with Nixon being on video looking and actually being a little bit older than JFK. He was pasty and sweaty, and he had this look on his face that was almost angry while he spoke. And JFK, on the other hand, you know, he looked young, he looked vigorous, and he was fit. And he spoke in such a relaxed manner. And he spoke directly to the audience rather than focusing on his opponent, focusing on Nixon, whereas Nixon was only focusing on debating JFK. And that kind of set the tone. You know, people feel a certain way when it comes to these emotional messages being delivered. And ultimately, I think JFK ended up winning that race on a 2-to-1 percentage scale. So those are just a few examples of kind of historic modern day examples. But what does emotional expression look like on a day-to-day basis? So people with high levels of emotional expression are open and congruent in the emotional messages that they send out. Again, talking about that synchronicity, right? It's very difficult to deliver a message and have every single one of our nonverbal and verbal cues align up, from your facial expressions to your body language to the tone of your voice to the volume of the voice to the words that you're choosing. All those things to be in congruence and also have a very I'm forgetting the word, a very open kind of tone in what you're speaking. It's not often that people are delivering in that manner. to that high of a capability. And so that's what we have to work towards. And we've all probably been in a situation where someone was attempting to capture our attention or tell us something of importance. And while at the same time that speaker, whoever that may be, just glancing down at their cell phone numerous times during their conversation with us. And even if we have the objectivity to look past that and kind of just continue to view them as someone who's telling us something important and someone who's credible, still subconsciously we're not taking that speaker very serious. We're looking at them as losing credibility because they're not delivering that congruent messaging on their emotions. They're telling us something, but they're doing something else, and that's kind of the point of it all. So the effects of having high emotional expression, at least an effective level of it, basically you'd be able to influence and inspire others into action more effectively, right? Whenever you're doing these with open style of communication and all of your gestures in terms of nonverbal and verbal are in congruence, you're going to be more effective in inspiring others and leading them to do something on your behalf. And when you have this type of this type of communication, other people will see you as more authentic and truthful. And so they'll literally feel more comfortable with you. And you all know how the saying goes, we all want to work with people that we like. You're going to extract more of the same from others at the same time. So once others feel more comfortable with you because of that authentic communication, they're going to end up sharing more with you. And so on a personal level, this strengthens relationships. And then on a business level, obviously this gives more opportunity to have your client, your customer, your partner open up so you guys can kind of become stronger in your relationship as well. A few ways to improve this, just to kind of finish off here. A daily journal, obviously, for all emotional intelligence is going to be a huge key in improving a specific skill. But a few questions you can ask specifically for this type of skill is 5 minutes at the end of each day. Ask yourself, which emotions did I express clearly today and to whom? Just kind of reflect back on that. And then how did I express them? What was the result of my expressing them in this way? And which emotions did I not express well? Why not? How can I express them so that I don't harm any relationships or goals in the future, right? Just this act of kind of reflecting on emotions that you shared that day is going to improve that skill over time. Also, a simple question to ask yourself is, what is the easiest emotion to express for you, right? And then in contrast, what's the hardest? I know personally for me, excitement has always been a tough one for me to show. Internally, I can feel whatever I want to feel, excited about any particular thing that's happening or going to happen in my life, but actually expressing it in a tone of my voice and using the right words as well as body language, most importantly, is extremely hard for me. So step one, becoming aware of that, and then step two, kind of developing some strategies around that to help improve that specific expression of that particular emotion. Lastly, again, talk to me because I've actually read through a lot of these different strategies and learned about them, and we can kind of talk about what triggers are holding you back from expressing these particular emotions. And once you become more aware of those, it's easier to start to develop the strategies around them. That's basically it. Another thing that I want to add is that with emotional expression, I forget the exact percentages, but it's something along the lines of people actually retain only about 7% of what someone says. I think it's somewhere around 11% of kind of the facial cues that they make, and then 55% of what people retain is the body language being given from the speaker. So it's such a huge thing to improve upon, and something that has to be, again, in congruence with the message that you're literally speaking and delivering to the people that you're speaking with. So I hope that was helpful, and of course I will add another video here shortly, but thank you all very much.